Hey guys, Castar here, another deck profile for you. This video is going to be on my other Kagero deck, Seal Dragons. I got it recently just because I needed to trade a friend for some stuff, and he was interested in giving me his Steel Dragons deck, just because he'd played with it a little bit and was tired of it. So he gave me all of his Steel Dragon cards, and then I modified it a little bit and turned it into a perfectly playable deck. I like it a lot, honestly. It's very competitive. It's almost more competitive than Overlord the End sometimes. You'll notice a couple of cards in here are sleeved differently. That's just because I'm currently using them in my Overlord deck, and I just didn't feel like unsleeving them just for this video, especially since I'm going to be playing Overlord in the tournament this weekend. So without further ado, let's get to the deck. Starting Vanguard is Lizard Soldier Conroe. For those of you that don't know his skill, it is Counterblast 1 and retire him, and then you search the deck for a grade 1 or less card and put it in your hand. You'll see later in the video how he is very useful for the integrity of this deck and the way the build works. So looking at my triggers, I've got a pretty standard trigger setup for most decks. For heals, Seal Dragon Shirting for special counterblast. For Seal Dragon Biella, critical trigger, again, special counterblast material. I run 4 critical triggers of Blu-ray Draco Kid. He cannot be special counterblasted, but the only thing that will eat him up is Lizard Soldier Conroe, because he is not special counterblast. And because he's the only card in the deck besides Conroe that isn't a Seal Dragon, it really doesn't hurt your special counterblast at all. Next and last is for Steel Dragon Art Peak, my draw trigger. Again, Steel Dragon for special counterblast. So as you can see, nothing special about the triggers. A lot of people like to run 8 crit 4 heal 4 draw nowadays, just because it's a pretty standard setup unless you've got something going on like stands or something like that. So looking forward to the grade 1s. I have 4 Steel Dragon Rhinocross Perfect Guard. You guys probably saw him in some of my other videos. I have 4 Steel Dragon Flannel, 10k attacker for the archetype. Nothing special there really, just a decent booster and then decent ride. There's you don't really use his 10k attacking skill too often. Then 4 Steel Dragon Kersey, amazing skill. If your opponent has a grade 2 card on the field, period, which with the mechanics of Steel Dragon they probably will, especially early game. So if they have a grade 2 card on the field, when Kersey is placed on the field, you can discard a card and draw, so nice cycling. A lot of people run Bar or other stuff like Kimnara for their last 2 grade 1 spots. But since I run Conroe, I like to run Steel Dragon Terry Cloth. Just 2 extra copies of him as my last grade 1 slots, basically. Because his skill is good, and I prefer to run Conroe as my starter. That way I can still draw into him later or fetch him with Conroe if I don't need Conroe's skill that game. And then still get his skill. Terry Claw's skill is special counterblast 1 Steel Dragon and put him into Soul. And if you have a Kagero Vanguard, you may choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it, and your opponent looks at up to 4 cards from the top of his or her deck, searches for a grade 2 unit, and calls it to the rear guard, then shuffles. So for those of you that don't know anything about Steel Dragons, the basic principle of Steel Dragons is to retire your opponent's rear guards and then force them to put grade 2s on the field so that you can either retire them with your skills later or use your main Vanguard skill, which is Steel Dragon Hellfire Blockade, and his skill will retire them. So basically the aim of the deck is to kill all of your opponent's rear guards and force them to call pretty much all grade 2, so that way they have to either retire the grade 2s or intercept them away, or do something to get rid of them so they can rescale their field properly, or just to force them to sit on it until you can kill them with your main skill and get rid of them and seriously minus your opponent, because of the fact that the skill retires what they want and gives them what they don't want. You're basically retiring 2 cards in one if you get your main gamut off late game. Grade 2s, I run 3 of the 10k vanilla Hunger Hell Dragon just because he's not really that important. 4 copies of Steel Dragon Jacquard, the 12k attacker for the tier list. And then this card, which is amazing in my opinion, actually much better than Berserk Dragon, at least in this deck. I've seen people try and run him in other Kagero decks and run a lot of Steel Dragon triggers so that way they can get the special counterblast, but it doesn't always work. In Steel Dragons, he's perfect though. Steel Dragon Corduroy. His main skill is pretty much exactly like Terry Cloth, which I showed you earlier, except he is just special counterblast to Steel Dragon. You don't soul charge him for it. And when he's placed on Vanguard or Rear Guard, if you have Kagero Vanguard, you may pay the cost, and if you do, choose your opponent's Rear Guard and retire it. And then your opponent again looks at up to 4 cards from the top of his or her deck and searches for a grade 2 unit and calls it to Rear Guard and then shuffles. So again, just like Terry Cloth you saw earlier, the mechanic of this deck is to retire your opponent's cards and get out as many of their grade 2s as possible, and then later slaughter them with your other skills. For grade 3s, I choose to run the Cross Ride version of Steel Dragons instead of the Break Ride. I feel like it's just a little more sturdy, and just because of the fact that it can force your opponent to guard, or either guard early from hand because of the Steel Dragon Blockade skill that blocks their intercepts. But it can also just help you, especially if you're going against other cross-ride decks, because 13k is on and off been the meta for Vanguard defense. Steel Dragon, Hellfire Steel Dragon, Blockade, Inferno can hit for 13 or 23 by himself, so that way he's still hitting on Vanguard. So I run 4 copies of each, because there's no reason not to. Again, Steel Dragon Blockade's effect, most of you probably know this, during your turn, all of your opponent's units cannot intercept as long as he's on the field, on the Vanguard circle. And then you cross-ride into Hellfire Steel Dragon Blockade Inferno. His secondary skill is that, of course, he gains plus 2,000 continuous for having Blockade on the soul. And then his main skill is Limit Break for Special Counterblast to Steel Dragons. You retire all of your opponent's grade 2 rear guards, and then he gains plus 10,000 until end of turn. So again, chaining cards like Corduroy and Terry Cloth, you fill up your opponent's field with grade 2s, and then just when they're trying to figure out how to get around that skill, you retire all their grade 2s. They have no problem getting around the skill now, but then they've lost 4 cards, 8 cards possibly if you filled up their field with grade 2s, because you retired the other cards to force them to call those grade 2s. And then also you're hitting with the 10k plus on your Vanguard, making you 23 by yourself. His Limit Break skill can be used for the special counterblast just to gain the plus 10, so you can use it without them having any grade 2s to retire. But I tend not to do that all the time. One, because I usually get Corduroy or Terry Cloth or something like that beforehand. I usually set up for the skill so that way I can retire their grade 2s, at least one with it. But because I feel like the Counterblast 2 for just plus 10 doesn't really help your game that much, it's really more effective if you can put the pressure on with the skill by retiring everything you can on their field first. So I would not do that unless you had no other option and you need to push for game. But overall, it's very consistent. The only other thing I know of that's as consistent as this right now is the Gold Paladin Liberators deck, which I've showed you guys already. So I'd play this if I could. If you're looking for a good Kagero deck, I definitely suggest this. just because of the fact that, like I said, it is a lot cheaper than most of, well, the only other good Kagero deck out right now, which is the Overlord the End deck, whether you're running the Dauntless Overlord the End or the Overlord the End cross-ride deck. Either way, I think that Steel Dragons is a good, cheap, and powerful alternative to using that deck, especially if you're just getting into Kagero. So that's the deck in the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, liked it. Subscribe and comment below about any other videos you'd like to see. The usual, anything you'd like to see me do on this channel, whether it's Vanguard fights or if it's a different deck profile you haven't seen yet. If I have it or I can build it, I might do that. So yeah, keep watching, guys, and thanks for watching this episode.